How's everyone doing? So, Strength Chat episode 37. This guy was actually my very first guest on Strength Chat. I am joined today by former GB powerlifting head coach Lawrence Farncombe. How are you doing?
Very good. And yourself? How are you doing? All right?
Yeah, not so bad. A few more episodes since the last time we spoke.
Yeah, I see some great names on there. Old the legend himself, Mark McQueen, was on there. So superstar lifter. So that was cool.
Yeah, that was a really interesting chat. I think I've been sort of quite lucky to speak to the likes of yourself and other coaches. I think the response has been really good. So since the last time we spoke, what have you been up to? How have you been keeping yourself busy?
Oh, do you know what? At the moment, it's a roller coaster. So effectively, between juniors, British champions, seniors, men's British champions, seniors, juniors, British champions, and now I've got 3 athletes competing today at the Arnold's. Setting up a massive gym, a huge project. That I'm like, I don't know if you watch it or anyone's familiar. I'm Marty Bird from Ozark at the moment. It feels like
All right.
so many things. It's just insane trying to project to actually. I wear so many hats from day to day. Not going on too much, but a little bit in background life. Like the other day, I got called on site. There was a fight between the builders and the air conditioning guys. And I'm like, how the hell am I getting these phone calls? I'm jumping on my motorbike, getting to the thing, and actually having to like sit these guys down and get them to walk off site, you know? And it's like, I don't know what's happened. I've gone from strength coach, powerlifting coach to everything, you know?
How's the new gym coming along?
Yeah, I mean, it is awesome. I've traveled a lot and coached in a few different countries, and obviously educationally spent time under great coaches. Actually, to lie, like Charles Parlequin being one of my mentors. So very sad to hear that yesterday as well. Really,
I only found out. I think it was this morning. I found out when I got into work. I remember reading some of his blogs, and he's sort of some of the guys that a lot of people first went to, which is
yeah. I mean, back in like 2005, 2006, I remember, I would get on a plane over to America, and it was really cool because I used to get to spend some time with him, even coaching some of his athletes. And I was never necessarily that into, and I'm still not that into like all the nutrition. I was more into, what he had done as a very, very successful strength coach. But, for me, honestly, he really gave me a little bit of light in the tunnel of what a great direction is to go in. And he was one of the initial people that really, started me off I was coaching a long time before that, but I'll be honest, I think I lacked a bit of direction. I was trying to reach from some texts over here, some journals over there, and I didn't have a clear, good strategy of developing athletes, not just powerlifting, we're talking about lots of sports here, of a clear strategy of developing athletes and really getting them to progress. I was kind of bouncing around. I think a lot of younger coaches, because there's so much information, it's probably even more like that now, that you can just kind of reach from too many, take too much, and then you're actually realizing you're going back on yourself because, hey, there's, with a roadmap, there's 20 ways to get there. You know what I mean? But if you don't make your mind up, if you keep changing your mind, you ain't going to get there, right?
Yeah.
And, it was something I suffered from, many years ago. And Charles was one of the guys that put me in the direction. I got to spend a lot of time because I was around him before he was a bigger name. Do you know what I mean? And even when he was a biggish name, I was around it. But, he put me on a clear track. So, yeah, but obviously rest in peace. I'm very grateful the time that I had with him, and all these, sometimes even crazy nights out we had in Sweden and all sorts of But anyway, another story that we can't talk about right now.
It's just amazing to hear how many coaches he sort of influenced. I saw something from Eric Cressy, just a little, he shared a post, and Charles Poliquin had emailed him saying, you're doing really well. Keep going down the route that you're going, which I don't think you realise. You think, the strength sensei, all the work that he did, but not as much as what he did with
so much behind the scenes. I mean, in the early days, you know, as well, you know, in the 90s, he was putting so much great information out there that kind of towards the end it went a bit nutrition-y, but you know, that's not my, you know, it's not what I'm into. It's not kind of where I'm at. But yeah, you're right, because Eric, I spent time with Eric when he was at Boston, in and around Boston. Of course, Charles was just down the road, so their facilities were actually really, really close. So on one occasion, I hopped from Charles's and went up and visited Eric, you know. And actually, I took an athlete, talking to Eric, a powerlifter as well, and spent some time with Eric, and we did loads of assessments about how to get this particular athlete to bring up their totals and try and offset the injuries, because Eric's the man for like injuries and rehab, prehab, right? And but yeah, they were really, really close together, to be honest. Probably about 100 miles apart, their facilities at most.
I think in that area there's quite a lot of gyms there, because I think is Boyle's gym, Mike Boyle's gym around there as well.
Yeah, I just went round that.
Yeah. So obviously you mentioned a little bit more about, you know, the amount of time you've been coaching. For anyone who missed the first time we spoke quite a few months ago, what's sort of your background? How did you get into powerlifting coaching? Obviously the topic of today that we'll go into a little bit more, the biomechanics side of things. What's your background in sort of that area in coaching?
Yeah, so I guess the way I found my way into it was in the early days of just being a strong guy in the gym, and lucky enough to have a few powerlifters around me who just noticed me that I wasn't that big a guy, but for my size, I was quite strong. By modern day standards, I probably have nowhere to think about nowadays, but at the time, you know, so I got into it, lifted. I was lucky enough to work in a gym back when I was 18. And then I got pretty bored. I worked part-time. I was on the building sites, and then I went traveling, landed in Hong Kong as the fitness industry kicked off. And because I had some rudimentary knowledge of how to periodize from powerlifting, when the fitness industry kicked off, then I just got landed with loads of athletes, because out there, nobody did. And I remember actually begrudging it. It's a funny story, because I remember thinking to myself, you know, just the average PT client, I can make so much more money. I haven't got to spend 2 hours like doing a block periodization model for a sailing, golfing, or maybe like a Thai boxing fight or something. And I was like, you know, it's so annoying. I keep getting these bloody athletes, but that's honestly what I used to think. And because nobody else was doing it out there, so anybody out there a lot of them would come to me. And but in the end, you know, because I'd gone through training and stuff like that, you know, and competing, and from a combative background as well, I just got bored of the one-to-ones, and I thought, actually, you know what, I can't stand this. It's just so simplistic, and so like, oh, there's your hour, have a great day. You know what I mean? And I'm not that person anyway, so you know, so yeah, I got into it that way, and then came back to the UK and carried on. Did more competitions, competing in like, it was like the BDFPA and the WFDA, because in reality the classic scene hadn't even wasn't fully out there. So it was raw lifting, and those feds were the only ones that were really doing raw lifting, where you had a lot of competitions and some way of progressing at raw lifting. I played around with Equipped, but I never had the time, you know, for Equipped. So I never quite went to. I've coached a few Equipped lifters, and they've done pretty well, but it's not.
It takes a long enough time to put the suits on.
What's that?
I said it takes a long enough time to put the suits on.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and let's be fair, you know, powerlifters, we're a bunch of boring ass people that just specialize too much, you know, maybe too much on the list. So, and everyone moans about us anyway, don't they? And they go, "Well, that bloody powerlifter, they've come in and all they've done is spent an hour and a half in the you know what I mean?" Yeah. So so I got into it that way, and then got more and more into like the S&C side of it as well, coming back from Hong Kong, and just try to educate myself. I was lucky enough to go over to America and spend a lot of time under some really top people as well, and see what they were doing. But all the time I paid a lot of respect to, obviously, really, you know, where S&C is strength and conditioning was really born out of, which was the Eastern blocks, and tried to pick up as much information from that direction as I could as well. You know, obviously as the internet grew, it became a lot easier to get information out there. you know. So yeah, been into it a long time. Was the GB head coach for the powerlifting from 2015 to 2018. Got phenomenal results that we blew it out of the water. So, you know, so that was cool. So enjoyed that very much. Dropped that because ultimately starting on the gym now. Worked with loads of athletes, mainly with professional boxers is the main sport that I work with outside of powerlifting. Actually right now I've not got any pro fighters because I've given it up to come to Cardiff, Wales, and effectively get the gym going. And then obviously I'll start opening my books up to other athletes as well, because I do like challenges. So for me, when I'm getting an athlete to perform in sports that have multiple energy systems at play, the programming becomes much more diverse and much more intricate. So for me, even though there's, you know, full respect to everybody doing powerlifting, coaching out there and programming, because I think from a strength point of view, in my opinion, it's some of the best work there. But obviously, when you're trying to bolt that in with other energy systems, you've got to learn how to juggle things around and program to a slightly more complex overview, but maybe not as complex when it comes to the strength. You know what I mean? So you might not specialize quite as much in that section of the development of the athlete.
Yeah, I think as a coach myself, you always want to find these new challenges, and one, it's a learning process for you yourself. You know, when something new comes along, you know, I love doing all the strength training and that sort of stuff. But when someone comes along and maybe wants a little bit of strength, but then something alongside it, it's quite interesting to change it up a little bit. So moving on to sort of the main topic that I want to chat about today. You're obviously known for, and I've seen some of your lifters lift, really technically good. Okay, so what is sort of, how do you go about making them so technically good? Because I know the main thing that I chat about for the powerlifters in my club and anyone who's doing strength training is all about creating tension. How important is that?
Massive. Just to put a quick overview, and I'll come back to tension as well. For me, I've actually got a system, and I'll put it out there so people know what it is. The overall system, and it's kind of more of a principle actually than a system, because it can be loose and I can change it. But for me, when I take on an athlete, even if they're elite level athletes, and if they're novices, all the better, because I get them from scratch and hopefully they've learned very little poorly. But I will do, in some ways, a block, what I'll call a repatterning phase. So effectively, to make someone technically very, very proficient, because in reality, when we talk about technical proficiency and we're talking about really being successful, what is it that we're trying to chase? And in powerlifting, as coaches, as I always say, what we're looking for is getting the athlete to be in the most biomechanically efficient position, to recruit the most amount of muscle and achieve the least range of movement to accommodate the rules of the sport. That is the fundamental of the mechanics that you're trying to coach. Now, how that looks from lifter to lifter will depend on their anthropometry, their lever lengths and how tall, how short, whatever they are, how big they are. So then what I'll do is I'll do a repatterning phase. So really repatterning is repatterning an old motor pattern, because you'll always pretty much get people, I've always had anyway, I'm sure sometimes somebody might get somebody that's never got under a bar, and great, what's the point of a repatterning phase? It's a patterning phase, because you just get it and you go. But most of the time that, in fact, I've never had that. But so what I'll do is I'll focus on a repatterning phase, where I'm relearning, getting them to relearn and create a new motor pattern in an initial phase. Then I'll get them to do a normalized phase. So then that normalized phase is I might have used boxes, knee blocks. I might have used weird exercises like iso clusters that I came up with, and different and hover deadlifts and all sorts of stuff that aren't really, people don't use, but I use them to chase a particular aspect of the lift to get it right. And I'll basically go away from those exercises and start to normalize the movements. So then I've normalized each movement, the squat, the bench, the deadlift. So now I'm normalizing it, and then I'll do a functional phase, which is really the function is strength. So then I'll start to challenge that new motor pattern once I've normalized it and it's set in. So I'll do it in those phases. Now, when it comes to tightness, how I work that in is, in truth, I probably wouldn't be the primary thing in a repatterning phase, even though at that point, that early on, it is that important to start to understand the principles. And like you're saying, that's why we're talking about that topic, is in the end, it can be the one thing that lifters just don't get. You know what I mean? Like they're actually displaying good movement, good mechanics. It's a very proficient movement. They're using the maximum amount of muscle groups. You know, they're minimizing the range of movement to accommodate the rules of the sport, but they don't understand the concept of tightness, and everything falls to bits, especially the mechanics, because they don't have the tightness. So I think you're 100%. It's great that we're talking about it, because it's a great subject, because nobody does, right? You think, because I actually, before this, I had 10 minutes before I walked my dog, and I thought, you know what's anyone else talking about on tightness here? And I thought, yeah, nobody's talking about anything. So it's a great opportunity to talk about it and how we both think is best to coach it. Anyway, I think you need to introduce it early on, but it becomes obviously primarily more important as the loads go up. So effectively, how it is for me, if I'm going to define what tightness is, I guess. So my definition of tightness is really about creating tension throughout the whole body. So if we put it in the context of a squat, because it might mean slightly different things from how you're going to apply that on different lifts. Yeah. But if we just go to, let's say, put it in the context of a squat, right? So when I'm talking about tightness, really, I'm virtually talking about every muscle group in the body becoming tight. Now, if I was to create tightness effectively and try to throw a ball, this is a great analogy that I've used with more novice and even intermediate lifters that we've probably both seen, I'm not saying advanced, because I don't know any advanced lifters that can't create good tightness. Yeah. Because you rather get injured so quick your career's over, yeah, or you just don't become a really elite level lifter, and that's that. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. If you can't do it, you're gonna make it. And that's that. But when I'm describing it personally, I'll say to somebody, right, if I'm going to pick up an object, a ball or anything, and I'm going to throw it as far as I possibly can, actually it's a case of contraction and relaxation, like throwing a punch or an incredibly fast 100-meter runner. The skill that they possess is the ability to switch on muscle fiber to nearly 100% and then turn it off and relax it. So because tension is going to slow the movement down. But now when I take a novice or an intermediate and they don't understand the concept of creating tightness, I'll say, look, if I asked you to throw a tennis ball and I said, right, but throw it like if you're a guy or a girl and you're flexing your muscles and you're really, really tensing your arm up and making your arm look great, like for a photo shot or something, you're not going to throw it very far, right? And they'll say, yeah. And I'll say, that's the sort of tightness that we're chasing in powerlifting. It's almost like really what we're doing here is we're creating a belt throughout the whole body. Yeah. Because all of that tightness is creating tension. So all of those joints are happy. So you've got those small intrinsic like proprioceptors around each joint. Now, if you're creating tightness, you're stabilizing that joint. Remember, what's really happening when we fail, when we get that failure, we can't lift the weight. Really what actually happens on a deeper level is the joints and the muscles are sensing danger, and they're sending from these proprioceptors inhibitory signals to the brain unconsciously, and then the brain sends signals unconsciously back to the muscles and the joints and the muscles around the joint. They're going to send inhibitory signals to turn down or shut off to try and protect itself. So that's why we can't lift the heavy weight. That's it in my most simplistic way, why you can't lift the heavy weight, Obviously with training over time, we turn down those inhibitory signals. Now, that's a good thing if we're strength athletes, but we don't want to turn them off because they are there to protect us. So they turn down, but as you build strength, you're not only turning them down, those inhibitory signals become like, no, I can handle this weight, la-di-da-di-da, right? So you've turned them down, but also you've built strength. So they're not in a position where those proprioceptors are going to send those signals to the brain and then get those via back inhibitory signals to the joint and then the muscles around it. So you're not going to fail. So when it comes to tightness and how that loops all the way in, sorry, I'm kind of doing this horrible mind map.
I'm keeping track, don't worry.
Because I always think about the big thing, what's the loop? What's really happening on that intrinsic level, right? So what happens effectively with tightness, it means that you're creating great joint stability throughout the body. All aspects of the body are in a better position. Therefore, the likelihood of certain joints, because, hey, there's so many joints being involved here when we're talking about loading our back, and that's why I put it in the context of a squat, is any of those joints could send inhibitory signals if they're not liking it. And if you're not creating tension, chances are they're going to. And therefore, you're going to get a downregulation of the force you can apply to lift the bar, or you're going to get switching off, depending on how great that is and how much the inhibitory signals send back. So by creating tension on a very deeper level, that's really what's happening. Now, there's also the thing that's one part of it. Another part of it, and this is me, actually, I'm talking as I'm thinking here because I've not really thought about this. I know it, but I've never really spoke about it, I guess, is another part with tightness is about the mechanics. That even if I've wrongly created a turning down of those inhibitory signals just by overexposure to very, very heavy weights, and it might not be, I've not been doing it safely. Let's just say I'm squatting under a really, really big load and I'm holding good mechanics. I've got great, as a coach, you've gone out there or I've gone out there and I've got a lifter that can display great mechanics. But then when they put a heavy weight on their back, because they're not creating tightness, everything changes and they get pulled and pushed out of the wrong position, out of the most biomechanically efficient position. And that's another thing because they haven't created enough tightness. So now they're in a poor position mechanically. So not only have they got the problem of inhibitory signals being sent to prime movers, but then they've also got the problem of being in a poor mechanical position, which might be unsafe, or they might not be able to create as great a force, which that is what that is, basically, a poor mechanical position. So for those reasons, tightness is super, super imperative to becoming a successful lifter, staying injury-free, and still displaying very heavy, very great, very good mechanics under heavy loads, under max effort loads.
So in terms of that, when you mentioned there about under the heavy load and not being able to produce as much force, would you then start looking at maybe the weak links in that chain, or would you use so for example, still talking about the squat, screwing those feet into the floor, everything's fine, then you put a little bit of load on, and then the knees start caving in. Yeah. Would you then sort of look at the weak links within that chain, or would you, for example, put a band around the knees when they're squatting, so you've got a little bit of an external factor to help with that technique?
That proprioceptive awareness about pushing the knees out, totally. Do you know what? I take a double-headed approach to it. Okay. That I firmly believe, and actually, I'm going to go back to Charles Poliquin. Charles Poliquin was an advocate of isolating then integrate. And that was his saying. I've stole it and I'm taking it from him. But yeah, I would isolate and integrate. Okay. Now, but in truth, I wouldn't necessarily wait to integrate. I'd actually do both at the same time. So for me personally, I would, because that's a good point. So again, really what we're doing when we corkscrew the feet, we're looking at external rotation from the hip. So it's really happening at the hip. And you're looking at those 9 external rotators of the hip. You get them really externally rotated, and that really is tightness. That is part of the tightness of the hip, right? You're going to create hip stability and not allow the knee to go valgus, so that actually the adductors can contribute to hip extension rather than pull the knees together and actually mean that they're turning down the quads, the quad involvement, the hamstring, the glutes, so forth, and actually having a dampening effect on those main muscle groups. But sorry, because I've gone off ballpark a bit. Your question was, just remind me your question, Steve. So it was,
would
you isolate?
Would you go about patterning that? Would you go through adding an external factor in using the bands around it, or how would you go about, or would you look at the weak link of the muscles that might not be working to help create that tension?
Personally, I'd do both. So if it was me and I had a lifter that gets a Q angle of the knee or slight valgus, depending on the extent or whatever, I would come at it from a point of view, right, when it comes to their supplementary exercises, I might do some lying external rotations so that they're lying and they're firing up. And I'll also look at priming, that I might think, well, they might actually have okay strength, but they don't know how to prime up those muscles. So I might get them to start off the squat with a lying external rotation where they're just tilting the leg up to get the fire up the external rotators, then stick a band around their knee. So now they're really aware of the muscle groups that are really supposed to be doing that, rather than just kind of John Wayne knee sort of position. And then use that band for the awareness, the proprioceptive awareness of pushing out, but also prime up the muscles so they're already primed, so they know which muscle groups are to be used. Now, when it comes to their assistant and accessory work post-workout, if I think I've identified when I've looked at those external rotation exercises and they're weak as piss, I might actually add those as accessory exercises at the end. But my goal at the beginning would be priming, not pre-fatiguing. Because obviously if I spend 4 sets of 14 reps on some external rotations and they're pre-fatigued, I'm going, hang about, their knee caves worse. You know, there's way worse like, Q angle in the knee. So yeah, I would take a double-headed approach to that. But I think I would isolate and integrate at the same time. There's no reason to split those up. But sometimes I might just go away and if I look at it, stand back from the programmatic plan, I'd stand back and think, oh yeah, I clearly am focusing more on isolation to bring those muscle groups up. If I kind of take a more distance view at it, and then I'm integrating it into the exercise. So yeah, both.
So when you chatted about the system in place of a sort of a repatterning normal and then going to put the function, would the aim to be, you know, as the lifter is able to create tension, slowly take away those supplementary exercises to help create that tension and just have it in the warm-up, and then progress the supplementary exercises to sort of help with to get stronger in their lifts? Would that be sort of your plan?
I wouldn't be far off that. It would be pretty simple. It would be like, depending on the individual, but that would be a nice approach to doing it if that's what the individual needs at the time. Definitely, yeah. So I'd be using more, more cues to get the right position early on in the repatterning phase, and then I might just use priming just in the normalized phase and take the cues out, which would have been the bands or the block or whatever it is. That would be, then I would just prime more in the normalized phase, and in the functionalized phase, hey, if it's falling to bits, I haven't done my job properly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I've got to redress it, or I've got to smack myself on the wrist and think, you didn't get them where they needed to be. You know what I mean? But I think, yeah, going all the way back to like tightness and defining it. Yeah, it is all about activating all those small intrinsic muscles as well as the big global muscles, the big prime movers that are getting the job done of lifting the heavy weight. I think that's really what we're doing. And obviously we'd be remiss not to talk about bracing, Valsalva maneuver and whatnot, because that's a huge part of creating tension. And even like, belts, it's hoop tension. What are we really doing with that? It's creating, we're pushing into it, creating tension. But I think a lot of people, unfortunately, use belts incorrectly sometimes. and and don't actually learn how to brace themselves first. So for me personally, again, taking a novice lifter and even an advanced lifter, I won't use any form of belt or anything like that in a repatterning phase at all. And then maybe on the heavier phases in a normalized phase, I would do that. But I think kind of going back to it as well from a programming point of view, I think the big mistake, and I'm going to kind of fire something out that everyone's going to go, oh, they were going to rather react negatively or positively to this comment, is I personally don't think there's any real good novice program in existence. Because the reason I say that is because there's some great programs once you've learned the mechanics. Like, you could go for, I don't know, even like a Texas method, which maybe is more intermediate. But the point being that there are good programs, but why isn't there a program out there where people are focusing on movement first before they're looking at building strength? Because you can't effectively, it's like, listen, it's like you've got to learn to walk before you can run. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So why is everybody trying to run? You know what I mean? It's like, and even if you had a great sprint coach, an athletics coach, they wouldn't get everyone going full speed sprints to teach how to sprint. That's not how they're doing it. So why in powerlifting are we all trying to get strong from the moment we walk in the door? Because I'll be honest, the consequence of learning great mechanics will get you strong anyway. Just because we both know putting load on with a novice, putting load on the bar, a little bit small incremental linear progression, even though it's not overly challenged in them strength, they will get stronger. But the difference is I get it all the time. I look at blocks of 8 to 10 weeks where I've got a repatterning phase, a normalized phase, and then after 8 to 10 weeks, and then I'll do a functional phase. So maybe it's 12 weeks of, 3-4 week blocks. And 9 times out of 10, I've always got PBs. Even if they would have carried on just doing their straight intermediate program, I've still beat what they could have done, what they could have gained over 12 weeks. You know what I mean? Because I just went back to the drawing board. But that's why I'm saying there's no good novice program in existence, because all the novice programs focus on gaining strength. Now, as a novice, you're going to gain strength anyway. What you need to do is in the initial phase, you need to focus on gaining good mechanics, because you're going to gain strength even if you do that. So you don't need the fastest rate of progression in that phase, because otherwise you can't improve the mechanics. It's the tortoise in the hare, you know what I mean? And we look out there and there just isn't. And that's why good coaches, like I won't, and it's nice because I'm going to be obviously at PB Performance, the gym in Cardiff, by the way. But I'm going to come and visit us. But I'm going to be back, coaching, physically rather than, online, which is right now all I can do because I'm so busy with everything. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be nice because, I'm going to be back where I'm coaching people and I know what I'm going to get. Well, I was told this is the best novice program. You're like, no, you are a novice. You need to learn how to lift before we can, before we purposefully chase strength, because you're going to get stronger anyway. So it doesn't matter to us. We'd rather you become a really good mechanical lifter so that you don't hit plateaus, so that effectively you don't get injured. And the truth is, we all know it, don't we? Strength's a long-term gap. Who's in it is the one who wins it in many cases. You know what I mean? Look how many championships are won just because somebody turned up and they were healthy, they could lift to their potential, and the top guys were out or girls were out because they were injured, or they performed poorly because they were injured, And that's why somebody's chasing these incredibly high-frequency, high-intensity style programs. It isn't necessarily a smart thing to do because it's like the candle that burned twice as bright burns for half as long, But the problem is, do they ever reach their potential? Like in other sports, a lot of people are talking about this now, that if you start too early, do you ever really reach your full potential? Because a lot of these athletes are burnt out. And I think when we look at North America, we've got to bear that in mind, that when we look at a lot of these lifters, mechanics, I mean, obviously there are some great mechanical lifters there, but probably not as many as you look at Europe and even like Russia and so forth. We all know that to be true, but yet they still make great gains. But at the end of the day, we're looking at a huge pool there. And if you're trying to compare it like for like, you shouldn't be. You know what I mean? So if you looked at how many people, oh yeah, mechanics, they're pretty good, you know, but you look at some of the European or even like Russian lifters, you think, wow, the mechanics are awesome. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, and of course there are those lifters over in North America, but there are, I don't think there is many, if I'm honest.
Yeah. You mentioned there about, you know, getting stronger is about being efficient. You mentioned at the start, you know, when I was chatting with Mark McQueen, he said again, you know, you've got to, when you walk out on the platform, you've got to have enough, you've done enough to lift the weight that is estimated of you. Why bust the gut, lose form, injure yourself, be out for a couple of weeks and have to go back? And in terms of programming, you know, if someone can do a bodyweight squat and it's absolutely perfect, and as soon as you add loading, everything goes to pot. Right, now we're just going to work on gradually, really small weights, adding it in, and maybe regress the exercise as far back as you can, as though you're still doing.
Just get the nervous system ready to handle the load, because that's your problem. Once someone displays great mechanics, it's down to you as a coach, or if you're coaching yourself as a lifter, it's down to you as an individual to say, I can display good mechanics. It's just about how I'm programming now that affects that. I'm just trying to be silly here, and I'm not taking this realistic approach of trying to get the neuromuscular system ready to handle heavier loads. I'm going from this to that, and it all breaks down. And it takes years before, you know, and I think I heard somewhere, and this might have been a North American podcast, about some coaches talking about, you know, the difference between the Russians, and I would actually take that further, I'd say the Europeans, because a lot of Scandinavians, and a good fair few of the Brits as well, but, you know, why there's less of a breakdown when they're nearing maximal, you know, and they were talking about that, and it was just, I think it was Boris Sheko that said, well, it's just we drill it in them. And again, it's like, yeah, but, you know, the thing is, we don't have the same big pool that America's got of lifters. You know, we want to keep our lifters injury free and build them up. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. So we have to, you know, we want to protect them. We've not got, and remember, there are people that are just more resilient to injury. So, you know what I mean? So, and you're going to get that where you're going to get some lifters that actually, you know, you can abuse them a bit more, you know, from a programming point of view. And they're just and usually it's juniors, and you'll see this a lot. And that's the hardest thing for a junior coming up, isn't it? That they think that, oh yeah, I used to do this and I used to do that. But you're like, hang about, you're at college then, and you were 18, 19, 20, 21. You're 26 now. You're working long hours. You know, you're living with a partner that can be good or could be stressful at times. And now you're still trying to carry that, and you're wondering why you're picking up all these injuries. Yeah. You know what I mean? You have to reevaluate all those extrinsic factors that play a role. And also your hormonal profile, it's changing. You know, before, you know, you had these hormones that were aging. You know what I mean? So you were more in line with maybe an enhanced lifter that might stay injury-free for whatever they're doing. You know what I mean? Who knows? So you kind of have to reevaluate yourself and just think, okay. But yeah, anyway, right, going back to tightness.
Yeah, I think once you start going down that rabbit hole of, you know, the big thing is, like you said there, looking at everything outside of it. You know, if you've had a really, really stressful day, you're already going to be a little bit, you know, tight and not really be thinking about preparing yourself. And, you know, that's where you might lose tightness within a squat. Just going back to, you mentioned it there a little bit about using the belt and bracing and that sort of stuff. How important does breathing play a role within that? Because I know, you know, most of the people that come to the powerlifting club at the gym down at Primal are beginners, and then there are a few people there who are sort of intermediates. So when I talk to them about breathing, they sound really confused, and when they're squatting, they're a little bit like they're overthinking breathing. But breathing is obviously something we do every single day. So when you have to think about it, it's a little bit confusing. So how important is breathing within bracing and the effect of the belt?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? I think with breathing, we'll all have certain ways of doing it, and I think that you might as well start as the very basics, like we probably all coach, is taking a deep breath in, contracting the diaphragm, activating the pelvic floor, and bracing. Personally, I don't coach pushing your stomach into the belt, because I found far too many times people tend to actually misinterpret that, and they don't create that really good core tension for all of those, you know, the transverse abdominals, the obliques, internal and external, all of that lot. Yeah, they don't do it so well, because I think over time, and I found this always actually, is that by putting the belt on and just focus on bracing the core, keeping everything tight, and activating Valsalva maneuver, which is the deep breath in, activating pelvic floor, compressing the diaphragm. What you're doing is you're effectively achieving a non-compressible cylinder in your midsection. So you're making the squishy midsection very, very strong.
Yeah.
By doing that, even without a belt, you're creating an anterior stabilizing force for the spine, because that non-compressible cylinder of your core is pressing up against the anterior aspect of the spine. So then once you've got your posterior aspect, you've got your, you know, the multifidus, you know, the erector spinae, all of those lot are all stabilizing the posterior, the back of it. And then your activating Valsalva maneuver is stabilizing the anterior. So you've got this effectively, and it will pull on the fascia and around the whole and create a hoop tension in itself. So by doing that, it's super important, because otherwise you're going to get a dampening effect on the load you can lift. So your legs might be strong, but if your core's weak as piss, then in reality, you're not able to lift up, because the squishy core, it's like, imagine two hydraulics and then stick a Swiss ball on top of the hydraulics and then a heavy weight. You know, you're dissipating the force of those hydraulics, your legs, right? So you've got to create that tension in the core so that effectively you can, so there's not a dampening effect of the force being generated by the legs. Now, the belt will help improve that for a powerlifter by creating more hoop tension. So it's acting almost like you've almost got two hoops. You've got the internal, external, oblique, all of that, because you've got the ponderosus. Look at that, I remembered that. That will go around anterior and posterior. And it almost, it's hard because I'm doing my hands now. No one's going to see them. It encapsulates the spine, and when it's tight and pulled, it pulls it really, really tight and squashes together to stabilize the spine. And then really, then the belt, you can add to that. But so that's really the basics of how Valsalva maneuver works. There's been a lot of research recently. I haven't read it for a while, so I'm not that on it, but that indicates that people talk about, you know, oh yeah, the potential to have a stroke. So maybe we should, that's scary stuff, right? Yeah. About the pressure that you're creating, and as it goes up, you know, will it burst blood vessels in the brain or around brain and all of that stuff? Well, apparently it's a bit, the best analogy I can give you, the fast analogy of why it's been researched and they're saying it doesn't now, is, if again I'm kind of using things because I speak literally, so sorry if you're listening. If I put a balloon in a cup, right, and I try and blow up the cup, yeah, that actually I can't blow the balloon up because it's in the cup. Your skull is the cup. So what they're saying now is that actual pressure doesn't really, and there's different aspects, different layers that doesn't actually make it up into the brain anyway. So, you know, so that whole thing about, oh yeah, you know, Valsalva maneuver and creating that deep breath can give you a stroke, you know, that actually that's not true. And actually, a good analogy of that, I learned this a long time ago from a coach, was, you know what, if you were going to have a stroke because you were creating Valsalva maneuver, it would just happen anyway, and you'd just be really lucky it's going to happen, because, and you might just be genetically predisposed, because, hey, if try not to get somebody, most people will intuitively do it to a degree anyway. So if, let's say, your car breaks down and you've got to put your shoulder behind the door frame and push it, you'll take a deep breath in, and if someone's trying to speak to you, you go, I can't talk. I put my core and pushing my bloody car. You know what I mean? So that is Valsalva maneuver. But obviously, we can learn how to use that better, so that we can effectively not have a dampening effect of the force that we're creating from the legs, and transfer that into going down and going back up in the most simplest terms.
Yeah. I think some people, when you start talking about breathing and using belts, people do talk about, you know, if I if I do take those breaths, if I do start wearing a belt, what if I can't breathe? What if I pass out? And my sort of answer is, then maybe you're not doing it properly, or you are unlucky. Do you start off when people first walking into the gym? Do you recommend not using belts and learning how to brace and get that core tight without using the belt, and then progress that in? Yeah.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I don't, I even regress people. I've had lifters use belts, smaller female lifters and guys that have been using the bigger belts out there that are awesome when you can use a belt properly. But for some reason, they're finding the proprioceptive awareness, because there's so much coverage. They're not aware of good spinal position or good core bracing. Yeah. So I take it off and then I reintroduce it, because don't get me wrong, I want them to wear great belts that are going to lift them more, but not at the expense of an incorrect spinal position or not bracing the core properly. And that is the limiting factor in their lift. And I have had some really advanced lifters that I've had to do that with, where I've had to take it away and add it back in. I think that it's fundamental to learn how to brace your core, create a neutral spine position under load, before introducing a belt.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people put them on too soon, and it's a problem.
Yeah. I think sometimes as well, people use a belt as maybe a support for the back, as opposed to using it what it's designed to do, which is get your breathing right, have something to, like, well, as a coaching cue, maybe to push it against, or keep that core tight. But I think sometimes people are reluctant to take those belts away, and just a little bit like what, going right back to the beginning about the systems that you talked about, that repatterning phase, drop the weight down a little bit, get that, your back and the anterior part of the spine nice and strong, and then add the belt back in, because the belt is there to, when you're getting up to the higher loads, in my opinion, the belt is there to make you lift those heavier weights. Yeah. But realistically, when you were chatting about, as a junior lifter, you can probably maybe do a little bit more. You've still got to be a human at the end of the day. You've still got to be able to have a healthy back, so you don't hurt yourself.
No, that's right. I think, people use them as a crutch, don't they? Too much. They use them as a crutch too much. And I think if you go into it too early and use them, chances are you're gonna hit plateau sooner or put yourself at more risk. And I think, again, going to tightness, we've got areas of tightness. We all know that I always say, you're trying to activate every muscle group in the body. And going to try and paint a picture again for like a more novice or maybe an intermediate that comes from a certain background when it comes to sport or whatever. If you come from, and I've had this a lot, that if you come from an athletic background, let's say, and you happen to be a good runner, sprinter or jumper, actually coaching tightness is the hardest thing, because they become very good at switching off and switching on and actually relaxing to create power, better power, increased rate force development. Speed of development, but anyway, wrong word. But anyway, so they've become very, very good at becoming very, very powerful. And the problem is in a sport like powerlifting, max effort lifting, it's real. Well, weightlifting and powerlifting are termed incorrectly, right? Really, we should be called weightlifting, and the weightlifters who do powerful movements should be called powerlifters. But most people know that. But in truth, to be powerful, you have to relax and then contract maximally very quickly. We're not doing that. If we relax at any point with a max effort load on any of the lifts, we're in trouble. And that's it. So when we talk of tightness, we've got to think about the core, about activating Valsalva maneuver, building up all those small intrinsic muscle groups to begin with, before we even add a belt, as you said. Then we've got to think about and you rightfully mentioned, the external rotators of the hip, which are really going to be the primary aspect of controlling how good the mechanics are in the leg, or one of the primary aspects, how good the mechanics are, and stop any kind of valgus or Q angle of the knee. All of those things need to be turned on and held super tight. It doesn't mean that we're not using the stretch shortening cycle, this potentiation of a counter movement jump. We are, but because of the extra weight, we can't afford to relax and do that. you know. And this is why, actually, you know what? Going back to Charles, we'll cite him again. You know, Charles told me a story many, many years ago about when he was working in, I think he was one of the S&C coaches for the Canadian bobsleigh team. And he was saying about a lot of the guys, they would crap themselves. They would go, they'd get really, really worried when one of the top 100 or 200 meter runners was coming. Their times weren't quite good enough anymore, and they were going from 100 meter sprinting, and they were looking at making their way on the Canadian team as a bobsleigh to one of the guys pushing the bob. I don't know that much about the sport, so yeah, don't get pissed off if I say words wrong here. But anyway, so he was saying that they always used to crap themselves, these guys, but a lot of them came from real kind of farmer backgrounds and were actually really quite strong guys. And they were fast, but they weren't that fast. And a lot of it had to do with that. Realistically, the guys that were the best sprinters actually were very powerful and could relax and contract. But when you add the weight of the bob, that's not necessarily a good thing. So what they found was if you could make it on the team, you had to hit certain times by pushing out a heavy bob or something that simulated a bobsleigh, and you had to push it, and they'd see who can push it the fastest for this distance, whatever that distance was. And they'd find that the guys that intuitively 100% were faster runners, unweighted, were never the guys, or rarely were the guys that actually could push this weight. So this is the thing that I found personally, taking a lot of athletes over the years, and I have had a lot of athletes come from athletic backgrounds like sprinting and different stuff like that. They've got a lot of genetic potential, a lot of fast twitch muscle fibers that they might be very, very lucky to tap into them, or they might be genetically gifted, or they've tapped into them from an early age. But then coaching tightness is the hardest damn thing, because they just want to get loose. The moment the moment they start to panic a little bit and the weight's maximal, they want to get loose and bounce out the hole and just get loose to achieve it. And you're like, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. This is max effort lifting. This isn't that same. You know, we can use all the foundation that you've got of this great genetic potential, fast twitch muscle fibers that have been fired up from an early age because you've been in that athletic background. But if you do that in this sport, you won't progress, and you're likely to get injured because they're losing tightness. You know, so
I think that'll only get you so far as well. You can get guys that are really, really strong, really, really, really powerful guys, and they'll shoot up really, really fast. Or girls, in fact, shoot up really, really fast. Then they'll get to a point where, like you mentioned before, hit a plateau. Right, well, how do I actually get past this now? I've rocketed these weights up, and now I'm stuck. Now what do I do?
Yeah, I was talking a bit, just a little bit more, and I am going to name drop, but I was talking a little bit more about coaching with Matt Gary, because he coaches Ray Williams, right?
Okay, yeah.
Not a well-known fact, by the way. Sorry, Matt, I told people, but he does. But anyway, and I was saying to Matt, you know, the thing is that I've noticed the most with Ray, because he's a phenomenally gifted, strong guy, right? I mean, I'm lucky enough to know, I remember SPD Ben Banks, and more name dropping, telling me about this guy, saying, you know, Lawrence, there's this guy, and he's squatting like some crazy weights in like running shoes, and they're just running. And I think the other day Ray posted something about somebody who actually paid for a bar, said, mate, you can't lift those sort of weights with that bar, when he was first getting into it. And so yeah, but I think obviously Ray comes from a very athletic background of American football, as far as I'm aware, and that side of it. But I was saying to Matt, you know, the biggest thing for me that Ray does differently is he's creating more and more tightness. Over the years, he's getting better and better at doing it, and that's why he's succeeding, because God, imagine if he wasn't. But the thing that, if you look at his early squats, early on, like the first time I saw him actually squat, well, actually, no, it was a video that Ben showed me of this guy who's an American football coach, right? So way before he was on the international scene. But then the video that I remember was in 2014, I think it was, in South Africa, when he won the World Championships. And I remember he was quite loose, and he kind of went, I mean, it's still, hey, amazing squat, but it looked, I thought, Jesus, even just keeping that bar path with being like that explosive, I thought, damn, I don't know how he does that. But he's become tight. The thing that I can see anyway, and what I was saying to like Matt, I was saying the biggest noticeable difference that I'm seeing is that he seems to be tighter, and he's really holding this great bar path, because of course you'd have to with those sort of weights, right?
Yeah.
So again, there's a good example of somebody that was always phenomenally gifted, but for me anyway, the biggest difference is his increased tightness.
Yeah. I actually had Ray Williams on as a guest, which was, awesome to chat to, a guy of that level. Yeah. And, when we're speaking about plateaus, he actually did say, he was a strong guy in the gym, but then he went and looked to get a coach just to get a little bit better, because weights were slowing down a little bit. And then, he basically just sort of said, and the rest is sort of history, because he's progressed now, is it 5 world titles?
Amazing. But to be honest, somebody that strong, he couldn't, without being tighter and that direction, in some ways, I imagine that somebody that gifted, if you don't manage them well, it does take great skill, because it's like you've got to build the foundation. You know what I mean? So
yeah. So that was I think that's a really good example of someone hitting a plateau, getting a coach, creating that tightness, and then seeing the weight.
Well, it's the best example. It's the best lifter, right?
yeah, absolutely. So we've chatted a little bit there about adding, creating tension, on about the breathing, adding the belts in. Do you have any go-to coaching cues or exercises that sort of, 9 times out of 10, this points people in the right direction? I know as lifters, you've mentioned at the start, people will be tall, short, thin, wide, all that sort of stuff, and different things will work for different people. But is there any sort of go-to systems, exercises, cues that you use?
Yeah. So I guess for me personally, on the squat, and it's very basic, and I think most of us are doing it out there who are coaches, and I think it's the right call. I think a poor squat's a great way to increase tightness for somebody that just tries to rely on just bouncing out the hole and mechanics break down and they don't understand. The other thing is obviously you've got to have the conversation, is tempo squatting in some ways, that trying to give someone, tighten them up to just make them do a controlled tempo. Now, I always say, this is a saying I use, tightness controls tempo. So sometimes people say, what tempo should I do on that squat? And I'll say, we'll wait and see. In other words, I want to see what is the ideal tightness, and then I could prescribe the tempo. But in truth, by the time they've got their ideal tightness, they'll know the tempo intuitively. So I don't ever really need to prescribe it on the main competition lifts, because I want what I call a positive eccentric. So I've got to create tightness first, and then what a lot of people do early on is they might be so tight that they're actually a little bit on the slow side, which I still think is probably better than being too loose, in my opinion, because they're not going to get injured and they're going to get stronger. Now, over time, I want them to increase, and I won't say I want you increasing the speed, because people relax. Because to get faster, you have to relax, right? So I'll say I want it to be more positive. So that's a cue I would use. So I want them to increase that positive eccentric tempo so that they can use the stretch shortening cycle to potentiate the concentric movement while they're holding all the tightness. So they're still using that stretch shortening cycle, but they're keeping the tightness. So I use a pause squat. Sorry, what's that?
I was just going to say, keeping it a little bit more control. Sometimes, especially chatting about the squat on the way up, it'll keep that perfect squat on the way down nice and tight, and then on the way up they'll try and make it a little bit faster, and then the bum will shoot up and it'll look more like a little bit of a good morning.
Chest fall pattern, definitely. You can do, or if the knee angle opens up too fast, it'll create that chest fall pattern. Because they're focusing too much on speed of the bar and not on the overall mechanics. But for me, a pause squat is good. A tempo squat's good. But once they start to get an idea of tightness, then I'll start to chase a positive eccentric tempo. Because at the same time, if the tempo's too slow, they are going to burn up a lot of ATP, a lot of energy, you know. And we talked about breathing. Actually, I didn't say it, but I always laugh when people say, "How do I breathe?" I say, "It doesn't matter. It's anaerobic," meaning that this, you know. But so in other words, in truth, you know, you taking a deep breath in, yeah, of course, you're not going to pass out and fall over. But actually, it's not aerobic sport. It's an anaerobic sport completely and utterly. So breathing's not that big. Well, it is a big deal as in creating tightness, of course. But how you breathe, I'll teach them how to take the deep breath in. And then, you know, some people might be doing reps. I'll say some people want to do it every rep, and that's okay. And some people might do it every second or third rep, and that's okay. But I would generally say probably 3 to 4 reps, and you want to take another deep breath in. But you never want to get to a point where you feel like you're going to pass out. That's not the goal, especially not to begin with. But yeah, pause squat's a good one for increasing tightness, and a tempo squat would be really sensible go-tos on a squat to increase tightness. And you being aware that you're trying to tense every muscle group in the entire body. So then on a bench, increasing tightness, like you see this horrible drop to the chest. And yes, a lot of bigger lifters do get away with it because they have so much mass. But in truth, if you're not a 120 plus, chances are that is not going to be beneficial for you, you know, because it's a lot of those intrinsic, you know, positions, the glenohumeral joint change into poor positions, which makes your likelihood of injuring yourself greater, and also those inhibitory signals being sent to the prime movers. Chances are you're not going to lift it, maybe winging and scapula, whatever it is. So with the bench, I like to do what I call a hover bench, which, to be honest, is a straight rip-off it's my rip-off of the Spotto, because the Spotto is a great exercise, another one. But I like to do a hover because a Spotto, strangely, a lot of people become very good at being tight to here, and then that's exactly like when it's like a half an inch or 2 inches, whatever you want to classify as the correct Spotto height, but it's normally between, you know, like 1 inch and 2 inches is what most people would coach and most people talk about. But that's the very point where people generally want to relax and drop it. So a hover is a straight rip-off. I just call it a hover bench because it cues people correctly, the terminology. So it means that the bar, every rep is still, and it's hovering above the chest, probably less than a centimeter. You know, a good cue is like, you know, if you could get someone to do it, is put their mobile phone, go, right, if you dump it on your chest, you break your mobile phone, don't you? But I always use that analogy. Yeah, I've never done it. I've always said I'll threaten them with it. But I threaten them and they think, you know, I don't want to dump it on my chest because I'll break my phone. Yeah, so that's a really, really good one. Obviously, Spotto is a good one, but generally it's a little higher, so you can still be at that range where you dump it down. And again, tempo. With the deadlift to create tightness, I think analogy, I use ISO clusters a lot to improve start position, and not just to improve start position, but what they do is they're actually going to end up, because they're really putting a lot of isometric force against the bar they can't actually move. They normally become a lot stronger off the floor, so it improves strength off the floor. So, but as well, it can use ISO clusters to get them to understand how not to wrench it or yank it, you know, pull it off the floor too explosively, so that they understand that the analogy I give generally is, imagine a light switch. We're not trying to flip the light switch. We've got a dimmer switch, and we're trying to increase the light through it. So in other words, because wrenching at a bar, chances are you might have set up perfectly, and wrench at the bar, boom, you pull yourself out of an ideal mechanical position. You also create a lot of shear force in the spine. And the better lifter you become, the more dangerous that becomes to you. And eventually, really great lifters, they might look like they do it very quickly, but they've just got a dimmer switch and they've become very good at doing it quickly. As a novice, just purposely hold on the bar and think, right, 20% force, 40%, 80%, and get yourself to the force that you need to maintain that torso angle. Because again, if you're not creating enough force to maintain that torso angle, you apply the force of the legs, chances are you'll get that chest fall pattern. So you've not got so in the end, everything shifts back. Your quads, you've taken them out of the equation because all the hips are shifted back, and all of a sudden the quads can't technically contribute, and your back angle's fallen Therefore, you either need to do more work or the bar's gone away from you. So you've got to do more work because of it, you know? So tension for me on the deadlift is iso clusters. Again, an exercise I invented. I'm sure other people have been doing very similar things. So it's just the name I've put on it. And one I stole from, again, I'm going to name drop. That's today's thing, name dropping, I reckon. I stole this from, it's such a cool exercise. I'm so glad I stole it from him as well. I don't know what the Norwegian translation is for it, but I called it glass floor. And I only use it on a sumo because the balance points are different with the conventional. But I call it glass floor sumos. So that's awesome for creating tightness, constant tightness. And I saw Dittemar with some of his athletes a few days after they'd lifted at one of the Worlds. And I said, what are you guys doing over there? They were doing like, you know, weights that were like 70%, maybe 75%. And they were just bringing the bar down so it was just floating above the floor, you know, and they were holding that tension and then straight back up. And anyway, he explained it. He says it keeps tightness, keeps time under tension. And it's I really like this exercise for training in good balance points and good bar path, because if you get it wrong, you feel you're wasting too much energy one way or the other, or too much force. So you can feel I'm working harder than I should be. And I just termed it glass floor sumos. And I think I've heard one or two other coaches call it the same, but I stole that from Dittemar. I imagine he probably came up with it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think for the deadlift there, that's some really useful information. I know I'm going to take away with, because, like you mentioned about, you know, someone will set up absolutely spot on for a deadlift, and then as soon as they'll try and sort of rag it off the floor, they'll try and bounce off the floor. So yeah, the actual the holds and the glass floor one, that's definitely something I'll think about in terms of programming for other people.
Yeah, so I'll give you the while you're there, because I mean it is the ISO clusters. All I do is I'll get a lifter, conventional or sumo with the ISO clusters. What I'll do is it's a training tool, and so what I'll do is in a repatterning phase, you'll often see this on my programs if I don't think they've got a good start position, if they're wrenching it off the floor, or if I think they're weak off the floor. And if they could have all of those, and it would be an awesome exercise, or they could have one or two of those problems, and it'd still be a good exercise to combat the problem. Mm-hmm. So all I would do, so just talking you through it, so take it away, by all means, steal it, use it. It'll just make me work harder with my athletes to try and beat your athletes. So that's cool. Challenge is what I want, but we all do. If we don't, then really we shouldn't be doing sport. But anyway, so what I would do is I'd get a lifter to do their normal warm-up, maybe up to like 65, 70%. And then the moment, let's just make up a lifter that their max is 190. Yeah, we'll just make up this random lifter. So they'll warm themselves up, you know, and they'll maybe go up to like, I don't know, 150, 160, 165. And then all of a sudden, they'll just chuck on 205. Boom. So they're already warmed up the muscle groups. And effectively, they'll then chuck on a supra maximal load that they can't lift off the floor. And to be honest, you could probably actually put 200 on there, because they've not primed the nervous system that well that they probably still wouldn't lift it. And that's a whole different subject, isn't it? We could talk about priming up for attempt selections and so forth, and what's the right warm-ups to do. But anyway, so then once they've got that super maximal load on the bar, they go up to the bar and they'll set themselves up in the mechanics that their coach has taught them, or that is ideal for them. They'll then go to the bar, hold on to the bar, hook grip if they're very sensible. But if they're not, fair enough, mixed grip. They'll go up to the bar, hold the bar, and then effectively they will apply more and more tightness. But first, I always say, listen, it's, again, I'm going to say, there's a blue book called Starting Strength, and there's a lot of great information in there, and there's no doubt about that. But there's one thing, guys, well, there may be more than one thing, obviously, but there's one thing that we've all got wrong when it comes to coaching a good spinal position, how to create it on a deadlift. And that is, don't pull yourself into the best position. Remember, your hip extensors, your legs are stronger than your spinal extensors. They are isometric. They work best isometrically. So in other words, my spinal extensors aren't as strong as my glutes, hamstrings, adductors, quads. They're just not. You know, we all know that. That's obvious. So why are we trying to pull ourselves in? That implies that I'm pulling myself in. That means that I'm trying to create this extended spinal position against the force of my lower body. It won't work. So that once they're in position, you have to hold them isometrically. So in other words, the best way to set that up is go up to the bar, get yourself into the right position, create the ideal spinal position, and then apply force. Don't try to pull yourself in, because if you do that, you're trying to fight against muscle groups that your spinal extensors aren't strong enough to fight against. They are strong enough to hold isometrically, but physically they're not strong enough. So go up to the bar, set yourself up, find the correct spinal position when you're holding it, and then apply force. Yeah. Now, when you're lifting maximally, of course you wouldn't do all these steps, but you become incredibly at doing it like that. You know what I mean? Yeah. But when we're learning it, it's a great way to learn it. You know what I mean? So once you've done it in that pattern, then once you're in the correct spinal position and nice neutral spine position, then start to gradually pull on the bar. And you pull on the bar for 5 seconds. So it's a 5-second isometric cluster. Then stand up, or if you're a big guy or suffer from low blood pressure, take a knee, because your head will feel like it's going to spin off. This will probably be the hardest exercise of your whole day if this is in there. Then rest 15 to 20 seconds so you can refire up those fast twitch muscle fibers again, and you're not obviously fatiguing where you're getting a worse and worse position. Do another 5 seconds. Then take a knee, intraset rest of 15 to 20 seconds. One more time, 5 seconds, take a knee, rest whatever you've been prescribed by your coach or you've prescribed yourself, you know, and then do it again. It might be 2-3 minutes, or you might go to maybe like a TKE or some other little exercise. And that is such an awesome way to just get people creating really, really great tightness and a great start position. And it's how to apply force to the bar, take the slack out the bar, which really great lifters all do. You know what I mean? But as novices, it's like, well, how the hell do you do that? But all they're doing is that, but loads faster. You know what I mean? They've made it incredibly efficient, you know?
Key word through the whole of this chat is efficient. I know I've taken quite a lot of information from what you've said there. Hope everyone listening has taken content from there. In terms of what you want the take-home points from this to be, what would be your top take-home points from this?
Cool. Okay. Well, because we're on about tightness, tightness controls tempo, not the other way around. But you have to learn what your tempo is by understanding tightness. So the moment you're displaying relatively good mechanics, or even at the same time, start to try to understand tightness. There is a difference between creating a really fast bar. This is why, even though I'm an advocate of dynamic training for recovery and movement practice, I think it's more an advanced means of training, because people just intuitively get loose. So anyway, the takeaways is tightness controls tempo is the most important thing. Start to understand and learn what tightness is early on. Think of it as throwing a ball with an arm tensed up, that there's this, it would be slower. And when you're doing it, obviously with tightness, you've got to apply it. You've got to think of the primary aspects of what is tightness. Yes, it's all the muscle groups, but you're looking at core, like you mentioned, you're looking at hip stability. You know, all of these are what we're holding tight to create or to maintain the most biomechanically efficient position, to recruit the most amount of muscle through the least range of movement to accommodate the rules of the sport. That's it in a nutshell. But if you don't understand tightness, even if you've learned how to do that, it will all fall to bits.
Yeah. As always, it's a little bit like I always feel left, especially from when I spoke to you the very first time, sort of mind blown, my brain sort of ticking over and thinking about everything that you've said, which is absolutely awesome. If anyone has got any questions for you or wants to come down and to PB Performance, how can they get hold of you? Where is PB Performance? Is it open yet? happening.
You're a star. That's why we love you. Right, here we go. This is so it's in Cardiff. It's not open yet. The 7th of October is the soft launch. The official launch, I think, is the 26th. Sorry, don't hold up. My mind's got so many dates in right now. It's October. We've got powerlifting, weightlifting, and CrossFit. The club itself, it's just mind blowing. It's got its own box within the gym. So the gym runs normally. Every bar in there, and this is, I'm not going to over promote it than this. We've got too many places to squat. We've got outdoor rigs, everything. But basically, every bar, and this is the only thing I'm going to say for powerlifters, every bar in there is rather IPF approved or it's IWF, which is International Weightlifting Federation. Every single bar in there. So you're never going to go searching. So yeah, if you are, we do day passes and whatnot, but yeah, have a look. It's mind blowing. I'm not lying to you. The place is mind blowing. We were very lucky to have Matt over from Matt Gary from America, a friend of mine, came over, and he said, honestly, Lawrence, I think he's worked at like Washington Redskins, and he, big money. He was like, yeah, facilities like that, you're just very rare. And in this country, they don't really exist. But, there's good gyms out there. Like, I've seen your gym and I've not been there, but it looks like a really nice one, to be fair.
Yeah. We're building up the plates and the bars to get a little bit more specific to the strength sports. I've been following the progress of PB Performance and the PB Performance gym, and it looks awesome. So I might be having a little bit of a road trip down there.
You lifters, have some fun, man.
So thanks again for taking the time to chat with me. Like I say, I enjoyed the very first time I chatted with you. Again, a lot of things for me to think about. Hope everyone listening enjoyed that as much as I did. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lawrence, and I will see you all next week.
Cool, man.